The story of the Beauty and the Beast. In a country very far from this is to be seen a great city wherein trade flourishes abundantly. It numbered amongst its citizens a merchant who succeeded in all his speculations, and upon whom fortune, responding to his wishes, had always showered her fairest favors. But if he had immense wealth, he had also a great many children, his family consisting of 6 boys and 6 girls. None of them was settled in life. The boys were too young to think of it. The girls, too proud of their fortunes, upon which they had every reason to count, could not easily determine upon the choice they should make. Their vanity was flattered by the attentions of the handsomest young gentleman, but a reverse of fortune, which they did not at all expect, came to trouble their felicity. Their house took fire, the splendid furniture with which it was filled, the account books, the notes, gold, silver, and all the valuable stores which formed the merchant's principal wealth were enveloped in this fatal conflagration, which was so violent that very few of the things could be saved. This first misfortune was but the forerunner of others. The father, with whom hitherto everything had prospered, lost at the same time, either by shipwreck or by pirates, all the ships he had at sea. His correspondents made him a bankrupt. His foreign agents were treacherous. In short, from the greatest opulence, he suddenly fell into the most abject poverty. He had nothing left but a small country house, situated in a lonely place, more than 100 leagues from the city in which he usually resided. Impelled to seek a place of refuge from noise and tumult, he took his family to this retired spot, who were in despair at such a revolution. The daughters of this unfortunate merchant were especially horrified at the prospect of the life they should have to lead in this dull solitude. For some time they flattered themselves that when their father's intention became known, their lovers, who had hitherto sued in vain, would be only too happy to find they were inclined to listen to them. They imagined that the many admirers of each would be all striving to obtain the preference. They thought if they wished only for a husband, they would obtain one, but they did not remain very long in such a delightful illusion. They had lost their greatest attractions when, like a flash of lightning, their father's splendid fortune had disappeared, and their time for choosing had departed with it. Their crowd of admirers vanished at the moment of their downfall. Their beauty was not sufficiently powerful to retain one of them. Their friends were not more generous than their lovers. From the hour they became poor, everyone, without exception, ceased to know them. Some were even cruel enough to impute their misfortunes to their own acts. Those whom the father had most obliged were his most vehement calumniators. They reported that all his calamities were brought on by his own bad conduct, his prodigality, and the foolish extravagance of himself and his children. This wretched family, therefore, could not do better than depart from a city wherein everybody took a pleasure in insulting them in their misfortunes. Having no resource whatever, they shut themselves up in their country house, situated in the middle of an almost impenetrable forest, and which might well be considered the saddest abode in the world. What misery they had to endure in this frightful solitude! They were forced to do the hardest work, not being able to have anyone to wait upon them. This unfortunate merchant's sons were compelled to divide the servants' duties amongst them, as well as to exert themselves in every way that people must do who have to earn their livelihood in the country. The daughters, on their part, had sufficient employment. Like the poor peasant girls, they found themselves obliged to employ their delicate hands in all the labors of a rural life, wearing nothing but woolen dresses, having nothing to gratify their vanity, existing upon what the land could give them, limited to common necessaries, but still retaining a refined and dainty taste. These girls incessantly regretted the city and its attractions. The recollection even of their younger days passed so rapidly in a round of mirth and pleasure was their greatest torment. The youngest girl, however, displayed greater perseverance and firmness in their common misfortune. She bore her lot cheerfully and with a strength of mind much beyond her years. not but what at first she was truly melancholy. Alas! Who would not have felt such misfortunes? But after deploring her father's ruin, could she do better than resume her former gaiety, make up her mind to the position she was placed in, and forget a world which she and her family had found so ungrateful, and the friendship of which she was so fully persuaded was not to be relied upon in the time of adversity? Anxious to console herself and her brothers by her amiable disposition and sprightliness, there was nothing she did not do to amuse them. The merchant had spared no cost in her education, nor in that of her sisters. At this sad period she derived all the advantage from it she desired, as she could play exceedingly well upon various instruments, and sing to them charmingly. She asked her sisters to follow her example, but her cheerfulness and patience only made them more miserable. These girls, who were so inconsolable in their ill fortune, thought their youngest sister showed a poor and mean spirit, and even silliness, to be so merry in the state it had pleased Providence to reduce them to. "How happy she is," said the eldest. "She was intended for such coarse occupations, with such low notions. What would she have done in the world? Such remarks were unjust." This young person was much more fitted to shine in society than either of them. She was a perfectly beautiful young creature. Her good temper rendered her adorable. A generous and tender heart was visible in all her words and actions, quite as much alive to the reverses that had just overwhelmed her family as either of her sisters. By a strength of mind which is not common in her sex, she concealed her sorrow and rose superior to her misfortunes. So much firmness was considered to be insensibility, but one can easily appeal from a judgment pronounced by jealousy. Every intelligent person who saw her in her true light was eager to give her the preference over her sisters. In the midst of her greatest splendor, although distinguished by her merit, she was so handsome that she was called the Beauty. Known by this name only, what more was required to increase the jealousy and hatred of her sisters? Her charms, and the general esteem in which she was held, might have induced her to hope for a much more advantageous establishment than her sisters, but feeling only for her father's misfortunes, far from retarding his departure from a city in which she had enjoyed so much pleasure, she did all she could to expedite it. This young girl was as contented in their solitude as she had been in the midst of the world. To amuse herself in her hours of relaxation, she would dress her hair with flowers, and like the shepherdesses of former times, forgetting in a rural life all that had most gratified her in the height of opulence, every day brought to her some new innocent pleasure. 2 years had already passed, and the family began to be accustomed to a country life, when a hope of returning prosperity arrived to discompose their tranquility. The father received news that one of his vessels, that he thought was lost, had safely arrived in port richly laden. His informants added they feared the factors would take advantage of his absence and sell the cargo at a low price, and by this fraud make a great profit at his expense. He imparted these tidings to his children, who did not doubt for an instant but that they should soon be enabled to return from exile. The girls, much more impatient than the boys, thinking it was unnecessary to wait for more certain proof, were anxious to set out instantly and to leave everything behind them. But the father, who was more prudent, begged them to moderate their delight. However important he was to his family at a time when the labors of the field could not be interrupted without great loss, he determined to leave his sons to get in the harvest, and that he would set out upon this long journey. His daughters, with the exception of the youngest, expected they would soon be restored to their former opulence. They fancied that, even if their father's property would not be considerable enough to settle them in the great metropolis, their native place, he would at least have sufficient for them to live in a less expensive city. They trusted they should find good society there, attract admirers, and profit by the first offer that might be made to them. Scarcely remembering the troubles they had undergone for the last 2 years, believing themselves to be already, as by a miracle, removed from poverty into the lap of plenty, they ventured for retirement had not cured them of the taste for luxury and display to overwhelm their father with foolish commissions. They requested him to make purchases of jewelry, attire, and headdresses. Each endeavored to outvie the other in her demands, so that the sum total of their father's supposed fortune would not have been sufficient to satisfy them. Beauty, who was not the slave of ambition, and who always acted with prudence, saw directly that if he executed her sister's commissions, it would be useless for her to ask for anything. But the father, astonished at her silence, said, interrupting his insatiable daughters, "Well, Beauty, dost thou not desire anything? What shall I bring thee? What dost thou wish for? Speak freely." "My dear papa," replied the amiable girl, embracing him affectionately, "I wish for one thing more precious than all the ornaments my sisters have asked you for. I have limited my desires to it, and shall be only too happy if they can be fulfilled. It is the gratification of seeing you return in perfect health." This answer was so unmistakably disinterested that it covered the others with shame and confusion. They were so angry that one of them, answering for the rest, said with bitterness, "This child gives herself great airs, and fancies that she will distinguish herself by these affected heroics. Surely nothing can be more ridiculous." But the father, touched by her expressions, could not help showing his delight at them. Appreciating, too, the feeling which induced her to ask nothing for herself, he begged she would choose something, and to allay the ill will that his other daughters had towards her, he observed to her that such indifference to dress was not natural at her age, that there was a time for everything. "Very well, my dear father," said she. "Since you desire me to make some request, I beg you will bring me a rose. I love that flower passionately, and since I have lived in this desert, I have not had the pleasure of seeing one." This was to obey her father, and at the same time to avoid putting him to any expense for her. At length the day arrived that this good old man was compelled to leave his family. He traveled as fast as he could to the great city to which the prospect of a new fortune recalled him. But he did not meet with the benefits he had hoped for. His vessel had certainly arrived, but his partners, believing him to be dead, had taken possession of it, and all the cargo had been disposed of. Thus, instead of entering into the full and peaceable possession of that which belonged to him, he was compelled to encounter all sorts of chicanery in the pursuit of his rights. He overcame them, but after more than 6 months of trouble and expense, he was not any richer than he was before. His debtors had become insolvent, and he could hardly defray his own costs. Thus terminated this dream of riches. To add to his disagreeables, he was obliged, on the score of economy, to start on his homeward journey at the most inconvenient time and in the most frightful weather. Exposed on the road to the piercing blasts, he thought he should die with fatigue, but when he found himself within a few miles of his house, which he did not reckon upon leaving for such false hopes, and which Beauty had shown her sense in mistrusting, his strength returned to him. It would be some hours before he could cross the forest. It was late, but he wished to continue his journey. He was benighted, suffering from intense cold, buried, one might say, in the snow. With his horse not knowing which way to bend his steps, he thought his last hour had come. No hut in his road, although the forest was filled with them. A tree, hollowed by age, was the best shelter he could find, and only too happy was he to hide himself in it. This tree, protecting him from the cold, was the means of saving his life, and the horse, a little distance from his master, perceiving another hollow tree, was led by instinct to take shelter in that. The night in such a situation appeared to him to be never-ending. Furthermore, he was famished, frightened at the roaring of the wild beasts that were constantly passing by him. Could he be at peace for an instant? His trouble and anxiety did not end with the night. He had no sooner the pleasure of seeing daylight than his distress was greater. The ground appeared so extraordinarily covered with snow, no road could he find. No track was to be seen. It was only after great fatigue and frequent falls that he succeeded in discovering something like a path upon which he could keep his footing. Proceeding without knowing in which direction, chance led him into the avenue of a beautiful castle, which the snow seemed to have respected. It consisted of 4 rows of orange trees, laden with flowers and fruit. Statues were seen here and there, regardless of order or symmetry. Some were in the middle of the road, others among the trees. All after the strangest fashion, they were of the size of life, and had the color of human beings, in different attitudes, and in various dresses, the greatest number representing warriors. Arriving at the first courtyard, he perceived a great many more statues. He was suffering so much from cold that he could not stop to examine them. An agate staircase with balusters of chased gold first presented itself to his sight. He passed through several magnificently furnished rooms. A gentle warmth which he breathed in them renovated him. He needed food, but to whom could he apply? This large and magnificent edifice appeared to be inhabited only by statues. A profound silence reigned throughout it. Nevertheless, it had not the air of an old palace that had been deserted. The halls, the rooms, the galleries were all open. No living thing appeared to be in this charming place. Weary of wandering over this vast dwelling, he stopped in a saloon wherein was a large fire. Presuming that it was prepared for someone who would not be long in appearing, he drew near the fireplace to warm himself, but no one came. Seated on a sofa near the fire, a sweet sleep closed his eyelids and left him no longer in a condition to observe the entrance of anyone. Fatigue induced him to sleep. Hunger awoke him. He had been suffering from it for the last 24 hours. The exercise that he had taken ever since he had been in this palace increased his appetite. When he awoke and opened his eyes, he was astonished to see a table elegantly laid. A light repast would not have satisfied him, but the viands, magnificently dressed, invited him to eat of everything. His first care was to utter in a loud voice his thanks to those from whom he had received so much kindness, and he then resolved to wait quietly till it pleased his host to make himself known to him. As fatigue caused him to sleep before his repast, so did the food produce the same effect, and his repose was longer and more powerful. In fact, this second time he slept for at least 4 hours. Upon awaking, in the place of the first table, he saw another of porphyry, upon which some kind hand had set out a collation consisting of cakes, preserved fruits, and liqueurs. This was likewise for his use. Profiting, therefore, by the kindness shown him, he partook of everything that suited his appetite, his taste, and his fancy. Finding at length no one to speak to, or to inform him whether this palace was inhabited by a man or by a god, fear began to take possession of him, for he was naturally timid. He resolved, therefore, to repass through all the apartments, and overwhelm with thanks the genius to whom he was indebted for so much kindness, and in the most respectful manner solicit him to appear. All his attentions were useless, no appearance of servants, no result by which he could ascertain that the palace was inhabited. Thinking seriously of what he should do, he began to fancy, for what reason he could not imagine, that some good spirit had made this mansion a present to him, with all the riches that it contained. This idea seemed like inspiration, and without further delay, making a new inspection of it, he took possession of all the treasures he could find. More than this, he settled in his own mind what share of it he should allow to each of his children, and selected the apartments which would particularly suit them, enjoying the delight beforehand which his journey would afford them. He entered the garden, where, in spite of the severity of the winter, the rarest flowers were exhaling the most delicious perfume in the mildest and purest air, birds of all kinds, blending their songs with the confused noise of the waters, made an agreeable harmony. The old man, in ecstasies at such wonders, said to himself, "My daughters will not, I think, find it very difficult to accustom themselves to this delicious abode. I cannot believe that they will regret, or that they will prefer the city to this mansion. Let me set out directly," cried he, in a transport of joy rather uncommon for him. "I shall increase my happiness in witnessing theirs. I will take possession at once." Upon entering this charming castle, he had taken care, notwithstanding he was nearly perished, to unbridle his horse, and let him wend his way to a stable which he had observed in the forecourt. An alley, ornamented by palisades, formed by rose bushes in full bloom, led to it. He had never seen such lovely roses. Their perfume reminded him that he had promised to give Beauty a rose. He picked one and was about to gather enough to make 6 bouquets when a most frightful noise made him turn round. He was terribly alarmed upon perceiving at his side a horrible beast, which, with an air of fury, laid upon his neck a kind of trunk resembling an elephant's, and said with a terrific voice, "Who gave thee permission to gather my roses? Is it not enough that I kindly allowed thee to remain in my palace? Instead of feeling grateful, rash man, I find thee stealing my flowers. Thy insolence shall not remain unpunished." The good man, already too much overpowered by the unexpected appearance of this monster, thought he should die of fright at these words, and quickly throwing away the fatal rose, "Ah, my lord," said he, prostrating himself before him, "have mercy on me. I am not ungrateful, penetrated by all your kindness. I did not imagine that so slight a liberty could possibly have offended you." The monster very angrily replied, "Hold thy tongue, thou foolish talker. I care not for thy flattery, nor for the titles thou bestowest on me. I am not my lord, I am the beast, and thou shalt not escape the death thou deservest." The merchant, dismayed at so cruel a sentence, and thinking that submission was the only means to preserve his life, said, in a truly affecting manner, that the rose he had dared to take was for one of his daughters called Beauty. Then, whether he hoped to escape from death or to induce his enemy to feel for him, he related to him all his misfortunes. He told him the object of his journey, and did not omit to dwell on the little present he was bound to give Beauty, adding, that was the only thing she had asked for, while the riches of a king would hardly have sufficed to satisfy the wishes of his other daughters, and so came to the opportunity which had offered itself to satisfy the modest desire of Beauty, and his belief that he could have done so without any unpleasant consequences, asking pardon, moreover, for his involuntary fault. The beast considered for a moment, then, speaking in a milder tone, he said to him, "I will pardon thee, but upon condition that thou wilt give me one of thy daughters. I require someone to repair this fault." "Just heaven," replied the merchant. "How can I keep my word? Could I be so inhuman as to save my own life at the expense of one of my children's? Under what pretext could I bring her here?" "There must be no pretext," interrupted the beast. "I expect that whichever daughter you bring here, she will come willingly, or I will not have either of them. Go, see if there be not one amongst them sufficiently courageous and loving thee enough to sacrifice herself to save thy life. Thou appearest to be an honest man. Give me thy word of honor to return in a month. If thou canst decide to bring one of them back with thee, she will remain here, and thou wilt return home. If thou canst not do so, promise me to return hither alone, after bidding them farewell forever, for thou wilt belong to me. Do not fancy," continued the monster, grinding his teeth, "that by merely agreeing to my proposition thou wilt be saved. I warn thee, if thou thinkest so to escape me, I will seek for thee and destroy thee and thy race, although 100,000 men appear to defend thee." The good man, although quite convinced that he should not vainly put to the proof the devotion of his daughters, accepted, nevertheless, the monster's proposition. He promised to return to him at the time named, and give himself up to his sad fate without rendering it necessary for the beast to seek for him. After this assurance, he thought himself at liberty to retire and take leave of the beast, whose presence was most distressing to him. The respite was but brief, yet he feared he might revoke it. He expressed his anxiety to depart, but the beast told him he should not do so till the following day. "Thou wilt find," said he, "a horse ready at break of day. He will carry thee home quickly. Adieu, go to supper and await my orders." The poor man, more dead than alive, returned to the saloon in which he had feasted so heartily. Before a large fire, his supper, already laid, invited him to sit and enjoy it. The delicacy and richness of the dishes had no longer, however, any temptation for him. Overwhelmed by his grief, he would not have seated himself at the table, but that he feared that the beast was concealed somewhere and observing him, and that he would excite his anger by any slight of his bounty. To avoid further disaster, he made a momentary truce with his grief, and, as well as his afflicted heart would permit, he tasted, in turn, the various dishes. At the end of the repast, a great noise was heard in the adjoining apartment, and he did not doubt that it was his formidable host. As he could not manage to avoid his presence, he tried to recover from the alarm which this sudden noise had caused him. At the same moment, the beast who appeared asked him abruptly if he had made a good supper. The good man replied in a modest and timid tone that he had, thanks to his attention, eaten heartily. "Promise me," replied the monster, "to remember your word to me, and to keep it as a man of honor, in bringing me one of your daughters." The old man, who was not much entertained with this conversation, swore to him that he would fulfill what he had promised, and return in a month alone or with one of his daughters, if he should find one who loved him sufficiently to follow him on the conditions he must propose to her. "I warn thee again," said the beast, "to take care not to deceive her as to the sacrifice which thou must exact from her, or the danger she will incur. Paint to her my face such as it is. Let her know what she is about to do. Above all, let her be firm in her resolution. There will be no time for reflection when thou shalt have brought her hither. There must be no drawing back. Thou wilt be equally lost, without obtaining for her the liberty to return." The merchant, who was overcome at this discourse, reiterated his promise to conform to all that was prescribed to him. The monster, satisfied with his answer, ordered him to retire to rest, and not to rise till he should see the sun and hear a golden bell. "Thou wilt breakfast before setting out," said he again, "and thou mayest take a rose with thee for beauty. The horse which shall bear thee will be ready in the courtyard. I reckon on seeing thee again in a month, if thou art an honest man. If thou failest in thy word, I shall pay thee a visit." The good man, for fear of prolonging a conversation already too painful to him, made a profound reverence to the beast, who told him again not to be anxious respecting the road by which he should return, as at the time appointed the same horse which he would mount the next morning would be found at his gate, and would suffice for his daughter and himself. However little disposition the old man felt for sleep, he dared not disobey the orders he had received. Obliged to lie down, he did not rise till the sun began to illumine the chamber. His breakfast was soon dispatched, and he then descended into the garden to gather the rose which the beast had ordered him to take to Beauty. How many tears this flower caused him to shed! But the fear of drawing on himself new disasters made him constrain his feelings, and he went, without further delay, in search of the horse which had been promised him. He found on the saddle a light but warm cloak. As soon as the horse felt him on his back, he set off with incredible speed. The merchant, who in a moment lost sight of this fatal palace, experienced as great a sensation of joy as he had on the previous evening, felt in perceiving it, with this difference, that the delight of leaving it was embittered by the cruel necessity of returning to it. "To what have I pledged myself?" said he, whilst his courser carried him with a velocity and a lightness which is only known in fairyland. "Would it not be better that I should become at once the victim of this monster who thirsts for the blood of my family? By a promise I have made, as unnatural as it is indiscreet, I have prolonged my life. Is it possible that I could think of extending my days at the expense of those of my daughters? Can I have the barbarity to lead one to him, to see him, no doubt, devour her before my eyes?" But all at once, interrupting himself, he cried, "Miserable wretch that I am, what have I to fear? If I could find it in my heart to silence the voice of nature, would it depend on me to commit this cowardly act? She must know her fate and consent to it. I see no chance that she will be inclined to sacrifice herself for an inhuman father, and I ought not to make such a proposition to her. It is unjust, but even if the affection which they all entertain for me should induce one to devote herself, would not a single glance at the beast destroy her constancy, and I could not complain? Ah, too imperious beast!" exclaimed he, "thou hast done this expressly. By putting an impossible condition to the means thou offerest me to escape thy fury and obtain the pardon of a trifling fault, thou hast added insult to injury. But," continued he, "I cannot bear to think of it. I hesitate no longer, and I would rather expose myself without turning away from thy rage than attempt a useless mode of escape, which my paternal love trembles to employ. Let me retrace," said he, "the road to this frightful palace. and without deigning to purchase so dearly the remnant of a life which can never be but miserable, without waiting for the month which is accorded me to expire, return and terminate this day my miserable existence. Beauty and the Beast, p. 236. At these words he endeavored to retrace his steps, but he found it impossible to turn the bridle of his horse, allowing himself, therefore, against his will, to be carried forward. He resolved at least to propose nothing to his daughters. Already he saw his house in the distance, and strengthening himself more and more in his resolution, "I will not speak to them," he said, "of the danger which threatens me. I shall have the pleasure of embracing them once more. I shall give them my last advice. I will beg them to live on good terms with their brothers, whom I shall also implore not to abandon them." In the midst of this reverie, he reached his door. His own horse, which had found its way home the previous evening, had alarmed his family. His sons, dispersed in the forest, had sought him in every direction, and his daughters, in their impatience to hear some tidings of him, were at the door in order to obtain the earliest intelligence. As he was mounted on a magnificent steed and wrapped in a rich cloak, they could not recognize him, but took him at first for a messenger sent by him, and the rose which they perceived attached to the pommel of the saddle made them perfectly easy on his account. When this afflicted father, however, approached nearer, they recognized him, and thought only of evincing their satisfaction at seeing him return in good health. But the sadness depicted in his face, and his eyes filled with tears, which he vainly endeavored to restrain, changed their joy into anxiety. All hastened to inquire the cause of his trouble. He made no reply but by saying to Beauty, as he presented her with the rose, "There is what thou hast demanded of me, but thou wilt pay dearly for it, as well as the others." "I was certain," exclaimed the eldest, "and I was saying this very moment, that she would be the only one whose commission you would execute. At this time of the year a rose must have cost more than you would have had to pay for us all 5 together, and, judging from appearances, the rose will be faded before the day is ended. Never mind, however, you were determined to gratify the fortunate Beauty at any price." "It is true," replied the father mournfully, "that this rose has cost me dear, and more dear than all the ornaments which you wish for would have done. It is not in money, however, and would to heaven that I might have purchased it with all I am yet worth in the world." These words excited the curiosity of his children, and dispelled the resolution which he had taken not to reveal his adventure. He informed them of the ill success of his journey, the trouble which he had undergone in running after a chimerical fortune, and all that had taken place in the palace of the monster. After this explanation, despair took the place of hope and of joy. The daughters, seeing all their projects annihilated by this thunderbolt, uttered fearful cries. The brothers, more courageous, said resolutely that they would not suffer their father to return to this frightful castle, that they were bold enough to deliver the earth from this horrible beast, even supposing he should have the temerity to come in search of him. The good man, although moved at their affliction, forbade them to commit violence, telling them that as he had given his word, he would kill himself rather than fail to keep it. Notwithstanding this, they sought for expedients to save his life. The young men, full of courage and filial affection, proposed that one of them should go and offer himself as a victim to the wrath of the beast, but the monster had said positively and explicitly that he would have one of the daughters and not one of the sons. The brave brothers, grieved that their good intentions could not be acted upon, then did what they could to inspire their sisters with the same sentiments, but their jealousy of Beauty was sufficient to raise an invincible obstacle to such heroic action. "It is not just," said they, "that we should perish in so frightful a manner for a fault of which we are not guilty. It would be to render us victims to Beauty, to whom they would be very glad to sacrifice us. But duty does not require such a sacrifice. Here is the fruit of the moderation and perpetual preaching of this unhappy girl. Why did she not ask, like us, for a good stock of clothes and jewels? If we have not had them, it has at all events cost nothing for asking, and we have no cause to reproach ourselves for having exposed the life of our father by indiscreet demands." If by an affected disinterestedness she had not sought to distinguish herself, as she is in all things more favored than we, he would have no doubt found enough money to content her. But she must needs, by her singular caprice, bring on us all this misfortune. It is she who has caused it, and they wish us to pay the penalty. We will not be her dupe. She has brought it on herself, and she must find the remedy. Beauty, whose grief had almost deprived her of consciousness, suppressing her sobs and sighs, said to her sisters, "I am the cause of this misfortune. It is I alone who must repair it. I confess it would be unjust to allow you to suffer for my fault." Alas! It was, notwithstanding, an innocent wish. Could I foresee that the desire to have a rose when we were in the middle of summer would be punished so cruelly? The fault is committed, however. Whether I am innocent or guilty, it is just that I should expiate it. It cannot be imputed to anyone else. I will risk my life, pursued she in a firm tone, to release my father from his fatal engagement. I will go to find the beast, too happy in being able to die in order to preserve the life of him from whom I received mine, and to silence your murmurs. Do not fear that anything can turn me from my purpose, but I pray you during this month to do me the favor to spare me your reproaches. So much firmness in a girl of her age surprised them all much, and the brothers, who loved her tenderly, were moved at her resolution. They paid her infinite attention and felt the loss they were about to sustain. But it was requisite to save the life of a father. This pious motive closed their mouths, and well persuaded that it was a thing decided on. Far from thinking of combating so generous a purpose, they contented themselves by shedding tears and giving their sister all the praise which her noble resolution merited, all the more from her being only 16 years of age, and having the right to regret a life which she was about to sacrifice in so cruel a manner. The father alone would not consent to the design of his youngest daughter, but the others reproached him insolently with the charge that Beauty alone was cared for by him, in spite of the misfortune which she had caused, and that he was sorry that it was not one of the elders who should pay for her imprudence. This unjust language forced him to desist. Besides, Beauty assured him that if he would not accept the exchange, she would make it in spite of him, for she would go alone to seek the beast, and so perish without saving him. "How do we know?" said she, forcing herself to assume more tranquillity than she really felt. "Perhaps the dreadful fate which appears to await me conceals another as happy as this seems terrible." Her sisters, hearing her speak thus, smiled maliciously at the wild idea. They were enchanted at the delusion in which they believed her to be indulging. But the old man, conquered by all her reasons, and remembering an ancient prediction by which he had learnt that this daughter should save his life, and that she should be a source of happiness to all her family, ceased to oppose the will of Beauty. Insensibly they began to speak of their departure as a thing almost indifferent. It was she who gave the tone to the conversation, and in their presence she appeared to consider it as a happy event. It was only, however, to console her father and brothers, and not to alarm them more than necessary. Although discontented with the conduct of her sisters towards her, who appeared even impatient to see her depart, and thought the month passed too slowly, she had the generosity to divide all her little property and the jewels which she had at her own disposal amongst them. They received with pleasure this new proof of her generosity, but without abating their hatred of her. An extreme joy took possession of their hearts when they heard the horse neigh which was sent to carry away a sister whose amiability their jealous natures would not allow them to perceive. The father and the sons alone were so afflicted that they could not contain themselves at this fatal moment. They proposed to strangle the horse. Beauty, however, preserving all her tranquillity, showed them again on this occasion the absurdity of such a design and the impossibility of executing it. After having taken leave of her brothers, she embraced her hard-hearted sisters, taking such a tender farewell of them that she drew from them some tears, and they believed, for the space of a few minutes, that they were almost as much afflicted as their brothers. During these brief yet lingering leave-takings, the good man, hurried by his daughter, had mounted his horse. She placed herself behind him with as much alacrity as though she were going to make an agreeable journey. The animal rather flew than walked, but this extreme speed did not inconvenience her in the least. The paces of this singular horse were so gentle that Beauty felt no more shaken by him than she would have been by the breath of a zephyr. In vain during the journey did her father offer 100 times to allow her to dismount, and to go himself alone to find the beast. "Consider, my dear child," said he, "there is still time. This monster is more terrible than thou canst imagine. However firm thy resolution may be, I cannot but fear it will fail on beholding him. Then it will be too late. Thou wilt be lost, and we shall both perish together." "If I went," replied Beauty, "to seek this terrible beast with the hope of being happy, it is not impossible that that hope would fail me at the sight of him, but as I reckon on a speedy death, and believe it to be unavoidable, what does it signify whether he who shall destroy me be agreeable or hideous?" Conversing thus, night closed around them, but the horse went quite as fast in the darkness. It was, however, suddenly dissipated by a most unexpected spectacle. This was caused by the discharge of all kinds of beautiful fireworks, flower pots, Catherine wheels, suns, bouquets, which dazzled the eyes of our travelers. This agreeable and unlooked-for illumination lighted up the entire forest and diffused a gentle heat through the air, which was become desirable, for the cold in this country was more keenly felt in the night than by day. By this charming light the father and daughter found themselves in an avenue of orange trees. At the moment that they entered it, the fireworks ceased. The illumination was, however, continued by all the statues having in their hands lighted torches. Besides these, lamps without number covered the front of the palace, symmetrically arranged in forms of true lovers' knots and crowned ciphers, consisting of double LLs and double BBs. On entering the court, they were received by a salute of artillery, which, added to the sound of 1,000 instruments of various kinds, some soft, some warlike, had a fine effect. "The beast must be very hungry indeed," said Beauty half-jestingly, "to make such grand rejoicings at the arrival of his prey." However, in spite of her agitation at the approach of an event which, according to all appearance, was about to be fatal to her, she could not avoid paying attention to the magnificent objects which succeeded each other, and presented to her view the most beautiful spectacle she had ever seen, nor help saying to her father that the preparations for her death were more brilliant than the bridal pomp of the greatest king in the world. The horse stopped at the foot of the flight of steps. She alighted quickly, and her father, as soon as he had put foot to the ground, conducted her by a vestibule to the saloon in which he had been so well entertained. They found there a large fire, lighted candles which emitted an exquisite perfume, and, above all, a table splendidly served. The good man, accustomed to the manner in which the beast regaled his guests, told his daughter that this repast was intended for them, and that they were at liberty to avail themselves of it. Beauty made no difficulty, well persuaded that it would not hasten her death. On the contrary, she imagined that it would make known to the beast the little repugnance she had felt in coming to see him. She hoped that her frankness might be capable of softening him, and even that her adventure might be less sad than she had at first apprehended. The formidable monster with which she had been menaced did not show himself, and the whole palace spoke of joy and magnificence. It appeared that her arrival had caused these demonstrations, and it did not seem probable that they could have been designed for a funeral ceremony. Her hope did not last long, however. The monster made himself heard. A frightful noise, caused by the enormous weight of his body, by the terrible clank of his scales, and an awful roaring, announced his arrival. Terror took possession of Beauty. The old man, embracing his daughter, uttered piercing cries, but recovering herself in a moment, she suppressed her agitation. Seeing the beast approach, whom she could not behold without a shudder, she advanced with a firm step, and with a modest air saluted him very respectfully. This behavior pleased the monster. After having contemplated her, he said to the old man, in a tone which, without being one of anger, might, however, fill with terror the boldest heart, "Good evening, my good friend." And turning to Beauty, he said also to her, "Good evening, Beauty. The old man, fearing every instant that something awful would happen to his daughter, had not the strength to reply. But Beauty, without agitation and in a sweet and firm voice, said, "Good evening, beast. Do you come here voluntarily?" inquired the beast, "and will you consent to let your father depart without following him?" Beauty replied that she had no other intention. "Ah, and what do you think will become of you after his departure? What it may please you," said she, "my life is at your disposal, and I submit blindly to the fate which you may doom me to." "I am satisfied with your submission," replied the beast, "and as it appears that they have not brought you here by force, you shall remain with me. As for thee, good man," said he to the merchant, "thou shalt depart tomorrow at daybreak. The bell will warn you. Delay not after thy breakfast, the same horse will reconduct thee. But," added he, "when thou shalt be in the midst of thy family, dream not of revisiting my palace, and remember it is forbidden thee forever. You, Beauty," continued the monster, addressing her, "conduct your father into the adjoining wardrobe, and choose anything which both of you think will give pleasure to your brothers and sisters. You will find 2 trunks. Fill them. It is right that you should send them something of sufficient value to oblige them to remember you." In spite of the liberality of the monster, the approaching departure of her father sensibly affected Beauty, and caused her extreme grief. However, she determined to obey the beast, who quitted them, after having said, as he had done on entering, "Good night, Beauty, good night, good man." When they were alone, the good man, embracing his daughter, wept without ceasing. The idea of leaving her with the monster was a most cruel trial to him. He repented having brought her into that place. The gates were open. He wished to lead her away again, but Beauty impressed upon him the danger and consequences of such a proceeding. They entered the wardrobe which had been indicated to them. They were surprised at the treasures it contained. It was filled with apparel so superb that a queen could not wish for anything more beautiful or in better taste. Never was a warehouse better filled. When Beauty had chosen the dresses she thought the most suitable, not to the present situation of the family, but proportioned to the riches and liberality of the beast, who was the donor, she opened a press, the door of which was of rock crystal, mounted in gold. Although such a magnificent exterior prepared her to find it contained some rare and precious treasures, she saw such a mass of jewels of all kinds that her eyes could hardly support the brilliancy of them. Beauty, from a feeling of obedience, took without hesitation a prodigious quantity, which she divided as well as she could amongst the lots she had already made. On opening the last cabinet, which was no less than a cabinet filled with pieces of gold, she changed her mind. "I think," said she to her father, "that it will be better to empty these trunks, and to fill them with coin, which you can give to your children according to your pleasure. By this means you will not be obliged to confide your secret to anyone, and your riches will be possessed by you without danger. The advantage that you would derive from the possession of these jewels, although their value might be more considerable, would be attended by inconvenience. In order to profit by them, you would be forced to sell them and to trust them to persons who would only look on you with envious eyes. Your confidence in them might even prove fatal to you, whilst gold pieces of current coin will place you," continued she, "beyond the reach of any misfortune by giving you the means of acquiring land and houses and purchasing rich furniture, ornaments, and precious stones." The father approved her forethought, but wishing to take for his daughter some dresses and ornaments, in order to make room for them as well as the gold, he took out of the trunks what he had selected for his own use. The great quantity of coin which he put in did not fill them, however. They were composed of folds which stretched at pleasure. He found room for the jewels which he had displaced, and in fact these trunks contained more than he could even wish for. "So much money," said he to his daughter, "will place me in a position to sell my jewels at my own convenience. Following thy counsel, I will hide my wealth from the world and even from my children. If they knew me to be as rich as I shall be, they would torment me to abandon my country life, which, however, is the sole one wherein I have found happiness, and not experience the perfidy of false friends with whom the world is filled." but the trunks were so immensely heavy that an elephant would have sunk under their weight, and the hope which he had begun to cherish appeared to him a dream and nothing more. "The beast mocks us," said he, "and feigns to give me wealth, which he makes it impossible for me to carry away." "Suspend your judgment," replied Beauty. "You have not provoked his liberality by any indiscreet request, nor by any greedy or interested looks. Raillery would be without point. I think, as the monster has bestowed it on you, that he will certainly find the means of allowing you to enjoy it. We have only to close the trunks and leave them here. No doubt he knows by what coach to send them." Nothing could be more prudent than this advice. The good man, conformably to it, re-entered the saloon with his daughter. Seated together on the sofa, they saw the breakfast instantly served. The father ate with more appetite than he had done the preceding night. That which had come to pass had diminished his despair and revived his confidence. He would have departed without concern if the beast had not had the cruelty to make him understand that he must not dream of seeing his palace again, and that he must wish his daughter an eternal farewell. There is no evil but death without remedy. The good man was not completely stunned by this order. He flattered himself that it would not be irrevocable, and this hope prepared him to quit his host with tolerable satisfaction. Beauty was not so well satisfied, little persuaded that a happy future was prepared for her. She feared that the rich presents with which the monster loaded her family was but the price of her life, and that he would devour her immediately, that he should be alone with her, or at least that a perpetual prison would be her fate, and that her only companion would be this frightful monster. This reflection plunged her into a profound reverie, but a second stroke of the bell warned them that it was time to separate. They descended into the court, where the father found 2 horses, the one loaded with the 2 trunks, and the other destined for himself. The latter, covered with a good cloak, and the saddle, having 2 bags attached to it full of refreshments, was the same which he had ridden before. So much attention on the part of the beast again supplied them with subject of conversation, but the horses, neighing and stamping with their hoofs, made known to them that it was time to part. The merchant, afraid of irritating the beast by his delay, bade his daughter an eternal farewell. The 2 horses set off faster than the wind, and Beauty instantly lost sight of them. She mounted in tears to the chamber which was appropriated to her, where for some time she was lost in sad reflections. At length, being overcome with sleep, she felt a wish to seek repose, which, during a month past, she had not enjoyed. Having nothing better to do, she was about to go to bed, when she perceived on the table a service of chocolate prepared. She took it, half asleep, and her eyes almost immediately closed. She fell into a quiet slumber, which since the moment she had received the fatal rose had been unknown to her. During her sleep, she dreamt that she was on the bank of a canal, a long way off, the 2 sides of which were ornamented with 2 rows of orange trees and flowering myrtles of immense size, where, engrossed with her sad situation, she lamented the misfortune which condemned her to pass her days in this place without hope of ever leaving it. A young man, beautiful as Cupid is painted, in a voice which touched her heart, then said, "Do not, Beauty, believe thou wilt be as unhappy as it now appears to thee. It is in this place that thou wilt receive the recompense which they have elsewhere unjustly denied thee. Let thy penetration assist thee to extricate me from the appearance which disguises me. Judge in seeing me if my company is contemptible, and ought not to be preferred to a family unworthy of thee. Wish, and all thy desires shall be fulfilled. I love thee tenderly. Thou alone canst bestow happiness on me by being happy thyself. Never deny me this, excelling all other women, as far in the qualities of thy mind as thou excellest them in beauty. We shall be perfectly happy together." This charming apparition, then kneeling at her feet, made her the most flattering promises in the most tender language. He pressed her in the warmest terms to consent to his happiness, and assured her that she should be entirely her own mistress. "What can I do?" said she to him with eagerness. "Follow the first impulse of gratitude," said he. "Judge not by thine eyes, and above all, Abandon me not, but release me from the terrible torment which I endure." After this first dream, she fancied she was in a magnificent cabinet with a lady whose majestic mien and surprising beauty created in her heart a feeling of profound respect. This lady said to her in an affectionate tone, "Charming beauty, regret not that thou hast left. A more illustrious fate awaits thee, but if thou wouldst deserve it, beware of allowing thyself to be prejudiced by appearances." Her sleep lasted more than 5 hours, during which time she saw the young man in 100 different places and under 100 different circumstances. Sometimes he offered her a fine entertainment, sometimes he made the most tender protestations to her. How pleasant her sleep was! She would have wished to prolong it, but her eyes, open to the light, could not be induced to close again, and Beauty believed she had only had an agreeable dream. A clock struck 12, repeating 12 times her own name, which obliged her to rise. She then saw a toilet table covered with everything necessary for a lady. After having dressed herself with a feeling of pleasure, of which she did not imagine the cause, she passed into the saloon where her dinner was served. When one eats alone, a repast is very soon over. On returning to her chamber, she threw herself on the sofa. The young man of whom she had dreamt again presented himself to her thoughts. "I can make thy happiness," were his words. "Probably this horrible beast who appears to command all here keeps him in prison. How can he be extricated? They repeated to me that I was not to be deceived by appearances. I understand nothing but how foolish I am. I amuse myself by seeking for reasons to explain an illusion formed by sleep and which my waking has destroyed. I ought not to pay attention to it. I must only occupy myself with my present fate and seek such amusements as will prevent my being overcome by melancholy." Shortly afterwards she began to wander through the numerous apartments of the palace. She was enchanted with them, having never seen anything so beautiful. The first that she entered was a large cabinet of mirrors. She saw herself reflected on all sides. At length a bracelet suspended to a girandole caught her sight. She found on it the portrait of the handsome cavalier, just as she had seen him in her sleep. How was it she recognized him immediately? His features were already too deeply impressed on her mind, and perhaps in her heart. With joyful haste she placed the bracelet on her arm, without reflecting whether this action was correct. From this cabinet, having passed into a gallery full of pictures, she there found the same portrait the size of life, which appeared to regard her with such tender attention that she colored, as if this picture had been the person himself, or that she had had witnesses of her thoughts. Continuing her walk, she found herself in a saloon filled with different kinds of instruments. Knowing how to play on almost all, she tried several, preferring the harpsichord to the others, because it was a better accompaniment for the voice. From this saloon she entered another gallery, corresponding to that in which were the paintings. It contained an immense library. She liked reading, and since her sojourn in the country she had been deprived of this pleasure. Her father, by the confusion of his affairs, had found himself obliged to sell his books. Her great taste for study could easily be satisfied in this place, and would guarantee her against the dullness consequent on solitude. The day passed before she could see everything. At the approach of night, all the apartments were illuminated by perfumed wax lights, placed in lustres either transparent or of different colors, and not of crystal, but made of diamonds and rubies. At the usual hour, Beauty found her supper served, with the same delicacy and neatness as before. No human figure presented itself to her view. Her father had told her she would be alone. This solitude began no longer to trouble her when the beast made himself heard, never having yet found herself alone with him, ignorant how this interview would pass off, fearing even that he only came to devour her. Is it any wonder that she trembled? But on the arrival of the beast, whose approach was by no means furious, her fears were dissipated. This monstrous giant said roughly, "Good evening, Beauty." She returned his salutation in the same terms, with a calm air but a little tremulously. Amongst the different questions which the monster put to her, he asked how she amused herself. Beauty replied, "I have passed the day in inspecting your palace, but it is so vast that I have not had time to see all the apartments and the beauties which it contains." The beast asked her, "Do you think you can get accustomed to living here?" The girl replied politely that she could live without trouble in so beautiful an abode. After an hour's conversation, Beauty discovered that the terrible tone of his voice was attributable only to the nature of the organ, and that the beast was more inclined to stupidity than to ferocity. At length he asked her bluntly if she would marry him. At this unexpected demand her fears were renewed, and uttering a terrible shriek she could not help exclaiming, "Oh, heavens, I am lost!" "Not at all," replied the beast quietly, "but without frightening yourself, reply properly. Say precisely yes or no," Beauty replied, trembling. "No, beast." "Well, as you object, I will leave you," replied the docile monster. "Good evening, Beauty." "Good evening, beast," said the frightened girl with much satisfaction. Extremely relieved by finding that she had no violence to fear, she lay quietly down and went to sleep. Immediately her dear unknown returned to her mind. He appeared to say to her tenderly, "How overjoyed I am to see you once more, dear Beauty, but what pain has your severity caused me? I know that I must expect to be unhappy for a long time." Her ideas again changed. The young man appeared to offer her a crown, and sleep presented him to her in 100 different manners. Sometimes he seemed to be at her feet, sometimes abandoning himself to the most excessive delight, at others shedding a torrent of tears which touched the depths of her soul. This mixture of joy and sadness lasted all the night. On waking, having her imagination full of this dear object, she sought for his portrait, to compare it once more with her recollections, and to see if she were not deceived. She ran to the picture gallery, where she recognized him still more perfectly. How long she was admiring him, but feeling ashamed of her weakness, she contented herself at length by looking at the miniature on her arm. At length, to put an end to these tender reflections, she descended into the garden, the fine weather seeming to invite her to a stroll. Her eyes were enchanted. They had never seen anything in nature so beautiful. The groves were ornamented with admirable statues and numberless fountains which cooled the air and shot up to such a height that the eye could scarcely follow them. What surprised her most was that she recognized the places wherein she had dreamt she had seen the unknown, especially at the sight of the Grand Canal, bordered with orange and myrtle trees. She could not but think of her vision, which appeared no longer a fiction. She thought to explain the mystery by imagining that the beast kept someone shut up in his palace. She resolved to be enlightened on the subject that same evening, and to question the monster, from whom she expected a visit at the usual hour. She walked for the rest of the day as long as her strength permitted, without being able to see all. The apartments which she had not been able to inspect the evening before were no less worthy of her admiration than the others. Besides the instruments and curiosities with which she was surrounded, she found in another cabinet plenty to occupy her. It was filled with purses and shuttles for knotting, scissors for cutting out, and fitted up for all sorts of ladies' work. In fact, everything was to be found there. In this gallery care had been taken to place a cage filled with rare birds, all of which, on the arrival of Beauty, formed an admirable concert. They came also and perched on her shoulders, and these loving little creatures vied with each other as to which should nestle closest to her. "Amiable prisoners," said she, "I think you charming, and I am vexed that you should be so far from my apartment. I should often like the pleasure of hearing you sing." What was her surprise when, as she said these words, she opened a door and found herself in her own chamber, which she believed was very distant from this gallery, having only arrived in it after turning and threading a labyrinth of apartments which composed this pavilion. A panel which had concealed from her the neighborhood of the birds opened into the gallery, and was very convenient, as it completely shut out the noise of them when quiet was desirable. Beauty, continuing her route, perceived another feathered group. These were parrots of all kinds and of all colors. All at her approach began to chatter. One said, good day to her, the other asked her for some breakfast, one more gallant begged a kiss, several sang opera airs, others declaimed verses composed by the best authors, and all exerted themselves to entertain her. They were as gentle and as affectionate as the inhabitants of the aviary. Their presence was a real pleasure to her. She was delighted to find something she could talk with, for silence was not agreeable to her. She put several questions to some of them, who answered her like very intelligent creatures. She selected one from amongst them as the most amusing. The others, jealous of this preference, complained sadly. She consoled them by some caresses, and the permission to pay her a visit whenever they pleased. Not far from this spot she saw a numerous troop of monkeys of all sizes, great and small, sapperges, some with human faces, others with beards, blue, green, black, and crimson. They advanced to meet her at the door of their apartment, which she had by chance arrived at. They made her low bows, accompanied by countless capers, and testified, by action, how highly sensible they were of the honor she had done them. To celebrate her visit, they danced upon the tight rope and bounded about with a skill and an agility beyond example. Beauty was much pleased with the monkeys, but she was disappointed at not finding anything which could enlighten her respecting the handsome unknown. Losing all hope of doing so, and looking upon her dream as altogether an illusion, she did her best to drive the recollection of it from her mind, but her efforts were vain. She praised the monkeys and, caressing them, said she should like some of them to follow her and keep her company. Instantly 2 tall young apes, in court dresses, who appeared to have been only waiting for her orders, advanced and placed themselves with great gravity beside her. 2 sprightly little monkeys took up her train as her pages. A facetious baboon, dressed as a Spanish gentleman of the chamber, presented his paw to her, very neatly gloved, and accompanied by this singular cortege, Beauty proceeded to the supper table. During her meal the smaller birds whistled, in perfect tune, an accompaniment to the voices of the parrots, who sang the finest and most fashionable airs. During the concert, the monkeys, who had taken upon themselves the right of attending upon Beauty, having in an instant settled their several ranks and duties, commenced their service and waited on her in full state, with all the attention and respect that officers of a royal household are accustomed to pay to queens. On rising from table, another troop proceeded to entertain her with a novel spectacle. They were a sort of company of actors, who played a tragedy in the most extraordinary fashion. These Signor Monkeys and Signora Apes, in stage dresses covered with embroidery, pearls, and diamonds, executed all the actions suitable to the words of their parts, which were spoken with great distinctness and proper emphasis by the parrots, so cleverly indeed that it was necessary to be assured that these birds were concealed in the wig of one actor or under the mantle of another, not to believe that these new-fashioned tragedians were speaking themselves. The drama appeared to have been written expressly for the actors, and Beauty was enchanted. At the end of the tragedy, one of the performers advanced and paid Beauty a very well-turned compliment and thanked her for the indulgence with which she had listened to them. All then departed, except the monkeys of her household and those selected to keep her company. After supper, the Beast paid her his usual visit, and after the same questions and the same answers, the conversation ended with a good night. Beauty, the lady apes of the bedchamber, undressed their mistress, put her to bed, and took care to open the window of the aviary, that the birds, by a warbling much softer than their songs by day, might induce slumber, and afford her the pleasure of again beholding her lover. Several days passed without her experiencing any feeling of dullness. Every moment brought with it fresh pleasures. The monkeys, in 3 or 4 lessons, succeeded each one in teaching a parrot, who, acting as an interpreter, replied to Beauty's questions with as much promptitude and accuracy as the monkeys themselves had done by gestures. In fine, Beauty found nothing to complain of but the obligation of enduring every evening the presence of the Beast, but his visits were short, and it was undoubtedly to him that she was indebted for the enjoyment of all imaginable amusements. The gentleness of the monster occasionally inspired Beauty with the idea of asking some explanation respecting the person she saw in her dreams, but sufficiently aware that he was in love with her, and fearing by such questioning to awaken his jealousy, she had the prudence to remain silent, and did not venture to satisfy her curiosity. By degrees she had visited every apartment in this enchanted palace, but one willingly returns to the inspection of things which are rare, singular, and costly. Beauty turned her steps towards a great saloon, which she had only seen once before. This room had 4 windows in it on each side. 2 only were open and admitted a glimmering light. Beauty wished for more light, but in lieu of obtaining any by opening another window, she found it only looked into some enclosed space, which, although large, was obscure, and her eyes could distinguish nothing but a distant gleam which appeared to reach them through the medium of a very thick crape. Whilst pondering for what purpose this place could have been designed, she was suddenly dazzled by a brilliant illumination. The curtain rose and discovered to Beauty a theater, exceedingly well lighted. On the benches and in the boxes she beheld all that was most handsome and well made of either sex, a sweet symphony, which instantly commenced, terminated only to permit other actors than monkey and parrot performers to represent a very fine tragedy, which was followed by a little piece quite equal in its own style to that which had preceded it. Beauty was fond of plays. It was the only pleasure she had regretted when she left the city. Desiring to ascertain what sort of material the hangings of the box next to her were made of, she found herself prevented doing so by a glass which separated them, and thereby discovered that what she had seen were not the actual objects, but a reflection of them by means of this crystal mirror, which thus conveyed to her sight all that was passing on the stage of the finest city in the world. It is a masterstroke in optics to be able to reflect from such a distance. She remained in her box some time after the play was over, in order to see the fine company go out. The darkness that gradually ensued compelled her to think of other matters. Satisfied with this discovery, of which she promised to avail herself often, she descended into the gardens. Prodigies were becoming familiar to her. She rejoiced to find they were all performed for her advantage and amusement. After supper, the Beast came, as usual, to ask her what she had been doing during the day. Beauty gave him an exact account of all her amusements, and told him she had been to the play. "Do you like it?" inquired the dull creature. "Wish for whatever you please, you shall have it. You are very handsome." Beauty smiled to herself at the coarse manner in which he paid her compliments, but what she did not smile at was the usual question, and the words, "Will you marry me?" put an end to her good humor. She had only to answer no, but, nevertheless, his docility during this last interview did not reassure her. Beauty was alarmed at it. "What is to be the end of all this?" she said to herself. "The question he puts to me every time, 'Will I marry him?' proves that he persists in loving me. His bounty to me confirms it. But though he does not insist on my compliance, nor show any signs of resentment at my refusal, who will be answerable to me that he do not eventually lose his patience, and that my death will not be the consequence?" These reflections rendered her so thoughtful that it was almost daylight before she went to bed. The unknown, who but awaited that moment to appear, reproached her tenderly for her delay. He found her melancholy, lost in thought, and inquired what could have displeased her in such a place. She answered that nothing displeased her, except the monster whom she saw every evening. She should have become accustomed to him, but he was in love with her, and this love made her apprehensive of some violence. "By the foolish compliments he pays me," said Beauty to her lover, "I find he desires to marry me. Would you advise me to consent?" "Alas! Were he as charming as he is frightful, you have rendered my heart inaccessible to him and to all others, and I do not blush to own that I can love no one but you." So sweet a confession could but flatter the unknown, yet he replied to her only by saying, "Love him who loves you. Do not be misled by appearances, and release me from prison." These words, continually repeated without any explanation, caused Beauty infinite distress. "What would you that I should do?" said she to him. "I would restore you to liberty at any price, but my desire is vain while you abstain from furnishing me with the means to put it in practice." The unknown made her some answer, but of so confused a nature that she could not comprehend it. 1,000 extravagant fancies passed before her eyes. She saw the monster on a throne, all blazing with jewels. He called to her and invited her to sit beside him. A moment afterwards, the unknown compelled him precipitately to descend and seated himself in his place. The beast regaining the advantage, the unknown disappeared in his turn. He spoke to her from behind a black veil which changed his voice and rendered it horrible. All her sleep passed in this manner, and yet, notwithstanding the agitation it caused her, she felt it was too soon over, as her awakening deprived her of the sight of the object of her affections. After she had finished dressing, various sorts of work, books, and animals occupied her attention until the hour when the play began. She arrived just in time, but she was not at the same theater. It was the opera, and the performance commenced as soon as she was seated. The spectacle was magnificent, and the spectators were not less so. The mirrors represented to her distinctly the most minute details of the dresses, even of the people in the pit. Delighted to behold human forms and faces, many of which she recognized as those of persons she knew, it would have been a still greater pleasure to her could she have spoken to them so that they could have heard her. More gratified with this day's entertainment than with that of the preceding, the rest of it passed in the same way that each had done since she had been in that palace. The beast came in the evening, and after his visit she retired as usual. The night resembled former nights, that is, it was passed in agreeable dreams. When she awoke, she found the same number of domestics to wait upon her, but after dinner her occupations were different. The day before, on opening another of the windows, she had found herself at the opera. To diversify her amusements, she now opened a third window, which displayed to her all the pleasures of the fair of Saint Germain, much more brilliant then than it is at the present day. But as the hour had not quite arrived when the best company resorted to it, she had leisure to observe and examine everything. She saw the rarest curiosities, the most extraordinary productions of nature and works of art. The minutest trifles were visible to her. The puppet show was not unworthy of her attention. Whilst waiting for more refined entertainments, the comic opera was in its splendor. Beauty was very much delighted. At the termination of the performances, she saw all the well-dressed people visiting the tradesmen's shops. She recognized amongst the crowd several professional gamesters who flocked to this place as their workshop. She observed persons who, having lost their money by the cleverness of those they played with, went out with less joyous countenances than they exhibited as they entered. The prudent gamblers, who did not stake their whole fortunes on the hazard of a card, and who played to profit by their skill, could not conceal from beauty their sleight of hand. She longed to warn the victims of the tricks they were plundered by, but at a distance from them of more than 1,000 leagues it was not in her power to do so. She heard and saw everything distinctly, without its being possible for her to make herself heard or seen by others. The reflections and echoes which conveyed to her all these sights and sounds had no returning power. Placed above the air and wind, everything came to her like a thought. The consideration of this fact deterred her from making vain attempts. It was past midnight before she thought it was time to retire. The need of some refreshment might have hinted to her the lateness of the hour, but she had found in her box liqueurs and baskets filled with everything requisite for a collation. Her supper was light and of short duration. She was in a hurry to go to bed. The beast observed her impatience, and came merely to say good night, that she might have more time to sleep, and the unknown liberty to reappear. The following days resembled each other. She found in her windows an inexhaustible source of fresh entertainments. The first of the other three afforded her the pleasure of witnessing Italian comedy, the second a sight of the Tuileries, the resort of all the most distinguished and handsome of both sexes. The last window was very far from being the least agreeable. It enabled her to see everything of consequence that was going on in the world. The scene was amusing and interesting in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it was the reception of a grand embassy, at others the marriage of some illustrious personages, and occasionally some exciting revolutions. She was at this window during the last revolt of the Janissaries and witnessed the whole of it to the very end. At all times she was certain to find something here to entertain her. The weariness she had felt at first in listening to the beast had entirely departed. Her eyes had become accustomed to his ugliness. She was prepared for his foolish questions, and if their conversations had lasted longer, perchance she would have not been displeased, but 4 or 5 sentences, always the same, uttered in a coarse manner and productive only of a yes or no, were not much to her taste. As the slightest desires of beauty appeared to be anticipated, she bestowed more care upon her toilet, although certain that no one could see her. But she owed this attention to herself, and it was a pleasure to her to dress herself in the habits of all the various nations on the face of the earth. She could do this the more easily as her wardrobe furnished her with everything she chose and presented her every day with some novelty. Contemplating her mirror in these various dresses, it revealed to her that she was to be admired in all lands, and her attendant animals, each according to their talent, repeated to her unceasingly the same fact: the monkeys by their actions, the parrots by their language, and the other birds by their songs. So delightful a life ought to have perfectly contented her, but we weary of everything. The greatest happiness fades when it is continual, derived always from the same source, and we find ourselves exempted from fear and from hope. Beauty had experienced this. The remembrance of her family arose to trouble her in the midst of her prosperity. Her happiness could not be perfect, as long as she was denied the pleasure of informing her relations of it. As she had become more familiar with the beast, either from the habit of seeing him or from the gentleness which she had discovered in his nature, she thought she might venture to ask him a question. She did not take this liberty, however, until she had obtained from him a promise that he would not be angry. The question she put to him was, were they the only 2 persons in that castle? "Yes, I protest to you," replied the beast, in a rather excited tone, "and I assure you that you and I, the monkeys and the other animals, are the only breathing creatures in this place." The beast said no more, and departed more abruptly than usual. Beauty had asked this question only with a view of ascertaining whether her lover was not confined in the palace. She would have wished to see and speak with him. It was a happiness she would have purchased at the price of her own liberty and of all the pleasures by which she was surrounded. That charming youth existing only in her imagination, she now looked upon this palace as a prison which would be one day her tomb. These melancholy ideas crowded also upon her mind at night. She dreamed she was on the banks of a great canal. She was weeping when her dear unknown, alarmed at her sad state, said to her, pressing her hand tenderly between his own, "What is the matter, my beloved Beauty? Who can have offended you, and what can possibly have disturbed your tranquillity? By the love I bear you, I conjure you to explain the cause of your distress. Nothing shall be refused to you. You are sole sovereign here. Everything is at your command. Whence arises the sorrow that overpowers you? Is it the sight of the beast that afflicts you? You must be relieved from it." At these words, Beauty imagined she saw the unknown draw a dagger and prepare to plunge it in the throat of the monster, who made no attempt to defend himself, but, on the contrary, offered his neck to the blow with a submission and a calmness which caused the beautiful dreamer to fear the unknown would accomplish his purpose before she could endeavor to prevent him. Notwithstanding, she had instantly risen to protect the beast. The instant she saw her efforts likely to be anticipated, she exclaimed with all her might, "Hold, barbarian! Harm not my benefactor, or else kill me!" The unknown, who continued striking at the beast, notwithstanding the shrieks of Beauty, said to her angrily, "You love me then no longer, since you take the part of this monster, who is an obstacle to my happiness." "You are ungrateful," she replied, still struggling with him. "I love you more than my life, and I would lose it sooner than cease to love you. You are all the world to me. and I would not do you the injustice to compare you with any other treasure it possesses. I would, without a sigh, abandon all it could offer me to follow you into the wildest desert. But this tender affection does not stifle my gratitude. I owe everything to the beast. He anticipates all my wishes. It is to him I am indebted for the joy of knowing you, and I would die sooner than endure seeing you do him the slightest injury." After several similar struggles, the objects vanished, and Beauty fancied she saw the lady who had appeared to her some nights before, and who said to her, "Courage, Beauty, be a model of female generosity. Show thyself to be as wise as thou art charming. Do not hesitate to sacrifice thy inclination to thy duty. Thou takest the true path to happiness. Thou wilt be blessed, provided thou art not misled by deceitful appearances." When Beauty awoke, she pondered on this mysterious vision, but it still remained an enigma to her. Her desire to see her father superseded during the day the anxiety caused by these dreams of the monster and the unknown. Thus, neither tranquil at night nor contented by day, although surrounded by the greatest luxuries, the only distraction she could find was in the theater. She went to the Italians, but after the first scene she quitted that performance for the opera, which she left almost as quickly. Her melancholy followed her everywhere. She frequently opened each of the 6 windows as many times without finding 1 minute's respite from her cares. Days and nights of equal and unceasing agitation began seriously to affect her appearance and her health. She took great pains to conceal from the beast the sorrow which preyed upon her, and the monster, who had frequently surprised her with the tears in her eyes, upon hearing her say that she was only suffering from a headache, pressed his inquiries no further. One evening, however, her sobs having betrayed her, and feeling it impossible longer to dissimulate, she acknowledged to the beast, who begged to know what had caused her afflictions, that she was yearning to see her family. At this declaration the beast sank down without power to sustain himself, and heaving a deep sigh, or rather uttering a howl that might have frightened anyone to death, he replied, "How, Beauty? Would you then abandon an unfortunate beast? Could I have imagined you possessed so little gratitude? What have I left undone to make you happy? Should not the attentions I have paid you preserve me from your hatred? Unjust as you are, you prefer the house of your father and the jealousy of your sisters to my palace and my affections. You would rather tend the flocks with them than enjoy with me all the pleasures of existence. It is not love for your family, but antipathy to me, that makes you anxious to depart." "No, beast," replied Beauty, timidly and soothingly. "I do not hate you, and should regret to lose the hope of seeing you again, but I cannot overcome the desire I feel to embrace my relations. Permit me to go away for 2 months, and I promise you that I will return with pleasure to pass the rest of my days with you, and never ask you another favor." While she spoke, the beast stretched on the ground, his head thrown back, only evinced that he still breathed by his sorrowful sighs. He answered her in these words, "I can refuse you nothing, but it will perhaps cost me my life. No matter. In the cabinet nearest to your apartment you will find 4 chests. Fill them with anything you like for yourself or for your family. If you break your word, you will repent it, and regret the death of your poor beast when it will be too late. Return at the end of 2 months, and you will still see me alive. For your journey back to me you will need no equipage. Merely take leave of your family the previous night before you retire to rest, and when you are in bed turn your ring, the stone inside your hand, and say with a firm voice, 'I desire to return to my palace and behold my beast again. Good night, fear nothing, sleep in peace. You will see your father early tomorrow morning. Adieu, Beauty.'" As soon as she was alone, she hastened to fill the chest with all the treasures and beautiful things imaginable. They only appeared to be full when she was tired of putting things into them. After these preparations she went to bed. The thoughts of seeing her family so soon kept her awake great part of the night, and sleep only stole upon her towards the hour when she should have been stirring. She saw in her dreams her amiable unknown, but not as formerly. Stretched upon a bed of turf, he appeared a prey to the keenest sorrow. Beauty, touched at seeing him in such a state, flattered herself she could alleviate his profound affliction by requesting to know the cause of it. But her lover, casting on her a look full of despair, said, "Can you ask me such a question, inhuman girl? Are you not aware that your departure dooms me to death?" "Abandon not yourself to sorrow, dear unknown," replied she. "My absence will be brief. I wish but to undeceive my family respecting the cruel fate they imagine has befallen me. I return immediately afterwards to this palace. I shall leave you no more." "Ah! Could I abandon a residence in which I so delight? Besides, I have pledged my word to the beast that I will return. I cannot fail to keep it, and why must this journey separate us be my escort? I will defer my departure another day, in order to obtain the beast's permission. I am sure he will not refuse me. Agree to my proposal, and we shall not part. We will return together. My family will be delighted to see you, and I will answer for their showing you all the attention you deserve." "I cannot accede to your wishes," replied the unknown, "unless you determine never to return hither. It is the only means of enabling me to quit this spot. How will you decide? The inhabitants of this palace have no power to compel you to return. Nothing can happen to you beyond the knowledge that you have grieved the beast." "You do not consider," rejoined Beauty quickly, "that he assured me he should die if I broke my word to him." "What matters it to you?" retorted the lover. "Is it to be counted a misfortune that your happiness should cost only the life of a monster? Of what use is he to the world? Will anyone be a loser by the destruction of a being who appears upon earth only to be the horror of all nature?" "Ha!" exclaimed Beauty, almost angrily. "Know that I would lay down my life to save his, and that this monster, who is only one in form, has a heart so humane that he should not be persecuted for a deformity which he refrains from rendering more hideous by his actions. I will not repay his kindness with such black ingratitude." The unknown, interrupting her, inquired what she would do if the monster endeavored to kill him, and if it were decreed that one of them must slay the other, to which would she afford assistance. "I love you only," she replied, "but extreme as is my affection for you, it cannot weaken my gratitude to the beast, and if I found myself placed in so fatal a position, I would escape the misery which the result of such a combat would inflict on me, by dying by my own hand. But why indulge in such dreadful suppositions? However chimerical the idea freezes my blood. Let us change the conversation." She set him the example by saying all that an affectionate girl could say, most flattering to her lover. She was not restrained by the rigid customs of society, and slumber left her free to act naturally. She acknowledged to him her love with a frankness which she would have shrunk from when in full possession of her reason. Her sleep was of long duration, and when she awoke she feared the beast had failed in his promise to her. She was in this uncertainty when she heard the sound of a human voice which she recognized. Undrawing her curtains precipitately, what was her surprise when she found herself in a strange apartment, the furniture of which was not near so superb as that in the palace of the beast. This prodigy induced her to rise hastily and open the door of her chamber. The next room was equally strange to her, but what astonished her still more was to find in it the 4 chests she had filled the previous evening. The transport of herself and her treasures was a proof of the power and bounty of the beast, but where was she? She could not imagine, when at length she heard the voice of her father, and rushing out she flung her arms round his neck. Her appearance astounded her brothers and sisters. They stared at her as at one come from the other world. All her family embraced her with the greatest demonstrations of delight, but her sisters in their hearts were vexed at beholding her. Their jealousy was not extinguished. After many caresses on both sides, the good man desired to speak with her privately, to learn from her own lips all the circumstances of so extraordinary a journey, and to inform her of the state of his own fortune, of which he had set apart a large share for herself. He told her that on the evening of the same day that he had left the palace of the beast, he had reached his own house without the least fatigue, that on the road he had cogitated how he could best manage to conceal his trunks from the sight of his children, and wished that they could be carried without their knowledge into a little cabinet adjoining his bedchamber, of which he alone had the key, that he had looked upon this as an impossibility, but that on dismounting at his door he found the horse on which his trunks had been placed had run away, and therefore saw himself suddenly spared the trouble of hiding his treasures. "I assure thee," said the old man to his daughter, "that the loss of these riches did not distress me. I had not possessed them long enough to regret them greatly, but the adventure appeared to me a gloomy prognostic of my fate. I did not hesitate to believe that the perfidious beast would act in the same manner by thee. I fear that the favors he conferred upon thee would not be more durable. This idea caused me great anxiety. To conceal it, I feigned to be in need of rest. It was only to abandon myself without restraint to my grief. I looked upon thy destruction as certain, but my sorrow was soon dissipated. The sight of the trunks I thought I had lost renewed my hopes of thy happiness. I found them placed in my little cabinet, precisely where I had wished them to be. The keys of them, which I had forgotten and left behind me on the table in the saloon wherein we had passed the night, were in the locks. This circumstance, which afforded me a new proof of the kindness of the beast and his constant attention, overwhelmed me with joy. It was then that, no longer doubting the advantageous result of thy adventure, I reproached myself for entertaining such unjust suspicions of the honor of that generous monster, and craved his pardon 100 times for the abuse which, in my distress, I had mentally lavished upon him.